press record, when you press go live, there's such a long delay to get the video started. And I don't know. Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Couples Academy Show. My name is Hassani.
And I'm Danielle.
And we are the Pettifords, coming to you live and direct all the way from our international headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia.
International is good. That has a good ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's our global quarters.
And it's Thursday, and so I'm happy that it's Thursday. Oh, wait, is it Thursday or is it Friday?
It's Thursday.
Okay, yeah, it's Thursday. So we're happy that it's Thursday. We want to bring some information to you and hopefully it'll help transform your life. But first, I want to ask you to make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you do not miss an episode. And when I say share, I really do mean it. I know you got friends, I know you have family members, I know there are people in your life that can really benefit from this information. Sometimes people don't like hearing it from you, so you can go ahead and share that link so they can hear us tell them, and then it'll serve two purposes.
That's right. All right, guys, we're in a series. We're talking about sex addiction, right? And as you remember, we said we're going to be dealing with this for quite some time because there's so much to cover. So, hey guys, let's get into it. Sexual addiction, the addiction and recovery series. We've been talking about the three levels of if you will, of addiction. Level number one, masturbation, pornography, sex with prostitutes, compulsive relationships, whether within the marriage or outside of the marriage. So there's a lot there.
Voyeurism.
Well, that's level number two. Level number two is voyeurism,
yes.
expeditionism. Barely can say the word. Exhibitionism. You know it. Well, hopefully you don't know what it is, but that's a thing. That's a thing. We were talking about that. And then indecent behaviors, whether it be touching or groping and things of that nature. And so with each level, there's a different level of severity as it relates to punishment, right? Because it is a crime. The first level, you can get away with and not actually go to jail. We're not saying that it's less, it's not a moral issue, it's a legal issue. Level number two, okay, you can actually go to jail, but it would be less of a crime than level number three, which is what we're gonna get into today. And the reason why we're talking about this is because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who are experiencing betrayals in their marriage, and there's always a root, there's always a motive and an intent. It comes from some place. This may not describe what you have done or the motive that you can attach yourself to, but for a lot of people, addiction is that thing. And the reason why we want to take our time with this is because many people, unfortunately, will slap sex addiction on their spouse when it doesn't need to be attached to their spouse because that's not the real issue for them.
Exactly. We always sling these terms around. It's just like narcissism, right? Which was made highly popular by Dr. Romney. And now everybody thinks that they're a narcissism expert. And every time you turn around, you don't like what somebody says, they're a narcissist. It's the same thing with sex addiction, where if you don't have the same sex drive as I do, you might claim, oh, this is a sex addiction. You need to have sex too much, or whatever the thing is. Also, there are a lot of people that have these tendencies and these issues, especially level one, that they've always been that way, and they had no idea that these were the traits of somebody who has a sex addiction, right? Because maybe you were raised a certain way, or you've been doing things like this your whole life and nobody ever said anything was wrong with it, right? So this is the point of this is to help you become aware so that you can take control of it. Just because you have a sex addiction does not mean that you can't make the changes and course correct that.
There it is. So let's go foundational. I know we've been saying this, given this definition, but repetition is the mother of all learning. So quickly, let's go through this. Sex addiction refers to excessive sexual thoughts, desires, urges, or behaviors that can't be controlled or cause distress and harm in your relationship, finances, and other aspects of your life. Key here, you cannot control it, though you think you can. You find yourself continuing to go back to this behavior. Sexual addiction is also called hypersexuality, compulsive sexual behavior, and it goes by other names as well. A sexual addiction substitutes, and this is the key, it substitutes a sick relationship to an event or process for a healthy relationship with others. The addiction becomes central to the life or to their life, and their secret life becomes more real than their public life. There's a lot there. And so, having lots of sex because you have a sex drive is very different than what we just read. When shame and guilt and all types of things are attached to it, that's the problem.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go into this. We're talking about level number 3. There's really 2 areas that we can focus on as it relates to how deep this thing can go. So first up at bat would be child molestation and incest.
Oh, gosh.
This is a real deal. We see this talked about in movies. It makes me think of so many movies come to my mind. I don't want to point out one in particular, but it reflects what goes on in people's homes and people's upbringings. And so that's why when you see people that become teary-eyed because they begin to reflect back about their upbringing, their childhood, and what they have dealt with. And what happens to you as a child is very traumatic, and it shapes you. It impacts how you play out your own relationships when you become an adult and enter into a committed relationship. But what's interesting is they were talking about the sex addict, him or herself. Anyone who has this compulsive relationship with young people stems from the fact that there was a developmental lag within that person, him or herself. Because you can rape adults. You can engage in all types of sexual behaviors with adults. Why is there such a desire to go after the child? Because there's a broken, hurt inner child within that adult that draws them to. There's a developmental lag. There's something that happened within them which has impacted their pathology in terms of who they approach sexually.
Correct. And I definitely have experience with it, not personally, but just in family with this. And it's shocking to actually learn that some of this stuff like molestation and incest is actually a sexual addiction. You just put they're a pervert or they're sick or all that. You don't understand what's really going on. But, somebody who is performing these lewd acts with children in particular, oftentimes they were abused and molested themselves as children. And so it shapes their experience with sex, that as a child, I had this feeling, and that created the deficit. And now I can only feel that same pleasure or excitement when I do the same thing to someone else. And this is how it is perpetuated. And it's a spiritual thing and everything else. But I think it's interesting, this statistic here that it says child molesters represent the largest group of sexually addicted offenders, 71% of them being sex addicts. And most sex offenders are friends or family members of the victims. That right there in and of itself helps you understand how this can be perpetuated. Because it happened to them, and now they're perpetuating it as a friend, as a family, going to the young children. So first of all, it's relevant to talk about just to set off alarms so that we can raise the red flag about what's happening in some of these people's homes. But a true sex addiction that is driving you, just like we talked about those other issues yesterday, that is driving you to the children, to molest. What's that brokenness? And if that's something that you're dealing with in your marriage, that is something that you need to take by the horns immediately. Yeah. That is not something that you ignore. You don't put your head in the sand. You don't turn your back. You don't hide. You don't cover. You confront that immediately, and you take those children to someplace safe and get away until that person can get some support and some help immediately.
You know what's deep about that? Man, we live in a society where we protect the violator instead of the victim. A lot of times we turn a blind eye, we give a pass to. We know that particularly when someone is dating someone else and they've moved into their home and the person they're dating has children, a lot of times the boyfriend, if you will, and in many cases the girlfriend, have sexually abused the children. Okay, it could be a stepfather, a stepmother. We've seen this, and oftentimes the children will complain, the children will say things, and their parent does nothing because their parent is in relationship with the very person who violated their child. And so they find themselves in a situation, do I believe my child? Do I believe my man or my woman? And and so much damage is done. And I've seen adults who have serious issues with their parents because they didn't feel protected, covered, believed, and it's impacted how they show up in their adult relationships.
But then you talk to the person and you find out that that's exactly what happened to them. That they were touched and they were molested and they told somebody and nobody said anything or did anything. Or, they beat them over the head and said, stop, don't you do that no more, but let them come back, into the house as if the person was reformed. And so it is perpetuated. It is a sick, to me, it's a what do you call it? It's not an inherited curse. What is that?
A generational curse passed down?
A generational curse that's passed down. And you'll see this in families where generations and generations are experiencing this. Somebody has to put a stop to it.
And when it comes to the generational curse, you got to understand it's spiritual, but it's also through observation and participation. Like, it's learned behavior. What was done to you, oftentimes you do to others, or what you've observed maybe hasn't been done to you, but you carry out that same behavior and you pass that down. It becomes cyclical. But here's the reality. Here's the spiritual piece. Maybe you didn't see it. Maybe it was your grandparents or your great-grandparents that had the same issue, and then it skipped over a generation and boom, it hit you. This is where the spiritual component is involved. And I can't wait till we get to the spiritual aspect of sex, because that's a level of depth that most people are just not aware of. And I think if they had insight into what this really was, they would approach sex and sexuality completely different, and I think it's important to have that conversation as well. But child molestation and incest is a very real thing, and there are consequences and legal consequences of that. Unfortunately, many people have gotten away with it and they've continued to abuse others. We know that the church in particular, how many stories have we heard about priests who have sexually abused children, and all they do, they get a slap on the hand and they get moved to another parish, moved to another church just to do it again, because the system, if you will, protects them, as opposed to not just punishment. It's not just about the punishment. It's about the healing process that they have to go. Concept from one of my mentors, really dealing with the difference between and compassion. And oftentimes there's a level of contempt that you have for the violator because of what they've done. And so we just want to punish them, but not realizing, to your point, that hurt people. It probably was done to them. How do we correct? How do we help heal? How do we help restore the person who's done it? Because locking them away for 10 years and letting them out, all you've done is create this insatiable desire that they could not fulfill in the prison. And now that they're out there, here they go again. What is the what is the transformation, restoration process that they need to go through to overcome this addiction so those type of behaviors don't happen again?
I mean, and so anybody who's listening, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about if I was in your shoes and I'm married to the person with the sex addiction, and I'm sitting here thinking, man, there's some real issues I'm dealing with, and I'm not sure what they're doing. I know that there's been some inappropriate behavior that needs to be addressed. What do? I'm married. I love this person. I want to stay committed, and I'm telling you that there are some reasons to leave.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is Couples Academy, and we're always talking about restoration. God hates divorce, but he hates sin. And he really hates when you mess with children. The punishment, Danielle, is crazy. When you mess with children. And so you are sitting there tapping your foot to the beat by turning a blind eye to what you know is going on under your roof. Now you are being held accountable. And so it's not about, I love him and I want to stay married to him. It's not all about that. It's not about staying married and keeping to my commitment. You're committed to those children too, but higher than anything, you're committed to God and doing what is right and righteous. And so if you're in that situation, there are so many hotlines, and maybe we should have had a hotline number up here that you could call, but you can Google and find a number that you can call to get yourself to a safe place. And if it's you that has found yourself, wow, I'm level 1, I'm level 2, sex addict, then it's your time. It's your season to go and get some support and rectify some of those things that have been with you since your childhood. You know, it wasn't your fault what you were exposed to in your childhood. It sure wasn't your fault what was exposed to you spiritually generations before you. But here you are dealing with it. And so it's time for you to rectify that so that you don't pass it down from generation to generation to generation. This is serious. This is serious. And these are the things that you really want to say, okay, do I need a controlled separation immediately? How do I do that? Who's going to support me in making sure that I separate myself from this toxic situation?
Yeah.
And that's why you need to reach out.
It's funny because, not funny, but, you know, the Bible is really clear on the punishment and the way, you know, God wants us to protect these children. And in Luke chapter 17, verse 2, it says, it would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. And so many children are being abused and manipulated. There's child molestation, there's incest, there's all types of sexual rituals that children are forced to endure. And there is a stiff penalty. And even if you've escaped the punishment of man in this earth realm with this worldly system, there's another court that you're going to have to go through. And so, listen, if this is your issue, please do the best you can. Reach out for help so that you can overcome your struggle so that other people don't have to be damaged by such behavior. This is getting deep, folks. Listen, what we're going to do is go to a quick commercial break. You're watching the Couples Academy show. We're talking about level number 3 of addiction. So far, we've covered child molestation and incest. We'll go into the next one on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
Hassani and Danielle here. I'm so excited. Look at us. Look at where we at. Look at where we at. We are at the Hilton Alpharetta, looking at this room before the incredible transformation that's about to take place on October 7th. Walls draped, stage up, lights, camera, action. And we want y'all to be there.
Are you going to be here?
Come on, get your tickets. It's October 7th. You don't want to miss this event. It is the Phoenix Awards Gala. It is our first inaugural, and we're just getting started. We starting hot.
Oh yeah, we got to.
We jumping out this gate like never before.
We believe either you go hard or you go home. We're not gonna be home. We're gonna
go
be
hard or go home.
Where you need to be.
Come on,
so let's get it.
We want to see you on October 7th. Go to get your tickets at couplesacademy.com. We'll see you there.
Couples Academy show, we're talking about this sexual addiction piece, and it's going to be something we're going to be chewing on for a while because there's so many components to it. Just to give you a heads up, we will talk about what do you do if you're the spouse of the addict, what healing process, what restoration process, what self-protection, what do you need to do when dealing with this type of individual. And then we want to talk about the addict, him or herself. Like, what is the healing process? Because like some people really believe this is what it's always been. This is what it's always going to be. I'm always going to have this addiction. I'm always going to have this struggle. And so this is what I've signed up for. I got to deal with the cards that have been dealt me. And that's not the fact of life at all. There are many people who have gone through a restoration process. So we will unpack that at length. But we're talking about these 3 levels, Danielle.
Yeah. And before we jump into the last part, I wanted to bring out out this study with the Mayo Clinic. They're asking the question, is society creating sex addicts, right, by normalizing all this behavior? But it's saying that sex addiction is a dependence on a reward of sexual experience. Addiction is the consistent inability to abstain or control behavior or craving. It's a disease of the brain that creates motivation to keep repeating an activity to fulfill relief of the brain. So, this is a big deal, y'all. This is not something that we should be taking lightly, and there is support out there for you to get. So just to reiterate some of the signs, because we're going from stage 1 all the way to stage 3, but some of the signs are difficulty postponing or controlling sexual urges, repetitive sexual activities or engaging in fantasies that cannot be stopped or controlled, little or no satisfaction from performing sexual activities, leaving the person wanting more. Conflicts in relationships, work, or other commitments due to focus on sexual activities, guilt or shame over behaviors, engaging in risky or inappropriate behaviors such as public sex, sex without protection, or exhibitionism, and then where we're at today, criminal sexual offenses in extreme cases. And so we're covering the whole gamut of what you could be experiencing with these sexual addictions, and some of these things are punishable by jail, rape and molestation and all these things, what we're talking about today. That's when you have allowed your sexual addictions from stage 1 to go awry. You started out just watching porn and fantasy and all that, and if you allow yourself to just trail on down the path, who knows where you can end up. So we really want to take this seriously, especially stage 1, where in this society, Mayo Clinic is saying, hey, we've said that these are mental issues. This is like mental health issue. But here society is saying, hey, this is normal. Society is putting it on TV. Society is showing it to our children. Society is teaching it in our school systems as normal, this sick behavior as normal, right? So that you may miss all of phase 1 and skip to phase 2 thinking that that's normal. So we really need to get these things under control.
And really, you just, went to the last one, which is rape and violence. And I think to the point, when you really watch documentaries about mass murderers, when you watch documentaries about, violent criminals, oftentimes pornography is in their history. And it's just like, it started off just looking at magazines, and then I got obsessed with watching videos and seeing all this content. And what happens is, whatever that high that you got from it, because it's a dopamine hit, right? So the dopamine hit is the reward system. So when I watch this, I feel good. And so you're chasing that feeling that you once had the first time. And like a drug addict, once you have that first hit, you're chasing that high. And you got to go deeper and you got to go harder in order to get that same feeling. You're chasing that
deeper
feeling.
And harder, right.
No pun intended. And so likewise, when it comes to pornography, it's just like, yeah, that's vanilla pornography. I want something a little bit more risque. So you go down the line. And so now you're saying, because there is a rabbit hole, folks. And then before you know it, you're leveling up your experience. And so this is why people who watch a lot of porn wind up going to a strip club, and they go from a strip club to then dealing with prostitutes, and then they go from prostitutes on to the next and the next and the next. Like, there's no end to it.
It's how every addiction begins. Keep it simple. Cigarettes, you start with one. You started out trying it. Let me just take one puff. Mm-hmm. You couldn't even do it right. You choked all over the place. You inhaled it and couldn't get the smoke down. Next thing you know, you're doing two, a whole pack, and now you're a changed smoker. So, the enemy is not trying to have you dip your toe in the water every day. He's trying to have you dip your toe in today and take a plunge tomorrow.
That's right.
And so this is why you have to really be cognizant of, where am I today? Do I have these tendencies? Do I have sex addict tendencies? How long have I been doing this? Because I'm hoping that most of our audience listening is not at stage 3, where you're out here in the middle of the night creeping and raping people. We hear about those scenarios on the news. Somebody who is out here raping somebody every other night. Those things happen. But most people are probably living somewhere between 1 and 2, right? Yeah. Level 1 and 2.
But the deep part is, We're talking about a sex addict that leaves their home and just goes on a raping and violent tirade. But what about those spouses who rape their spouse? How many people, and we've heard these stories, who are raped literally by their spouse? And so going back to scenarios where a couple can have sex every single day, there's a healthy version of that. But at the same time, there's a very enslaving, subjugating, violent version of that where one has no power, no control. It's not a mutually beneficial experience. They're constantly being taken advantage of by their spouse. And if you don't comply, that's when the physical violence comes into the bedroom. So this is a very real thing. And what happens is this is a person who now protects their spouse. They accommodate, they rationalize, they justify, they self-blame. They somehow realize, well, maybe I wasn't doing this enough or offering that enough. And so I'm the reason why they're reacting like this. So you become a cover for your spouse's addiction. And so that's why nothing ever changes. It gets progressively worse.
And, in those scenarios, you might find that there are just multiple addictions. This person might actually have a drug addiction as well. A sex addiction and a drug addiction, alcohol addiction, all these things go hand in hand. And that's the plan of the enemy, really, to take you all the way down into all of that so he has complete and total control of you. So wherever you're at, it's about identifying it and really getting to the point when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, you're ready to do something about it. And sometimes the people in your life that have turned a blind eye, when they really stand up and show up and refuse to participate in your life, be a part of your life, and put that ultimatum out there, sometimes that's what is required for that person to go and get some real help where they can get into a process. And sometimes that process can be 30 days. They're in an institute where they're away and they're being rewired. Yeah. So if that's you or if that's somebody that send this to them. They really need a wake-up call because anybody who has any level of a sex addiction is headed to a very dark place.
Listen, guys, I hope this was helpful just to give you some more insight, but we're not finished. We're just getting started. Now, tomorrow's Friday, and as you know, it's Q&A day. We're here to answer all of your questions, whether it's related to this topic or not. So make sure you write them down. You get in here early and let's have a great conversation. But until then, enjoy your day and make sure you click that like, share, and subscribe button. There's other people who need this information, and we want you to be an advocate of Couples Academy as we continue to move forward. All right, guys, have a great day. See you on tomorrow.
Bye.